Using stamps to make your own card backgrounds is a really easy way to customize the look and get creative. But you definitely need some great stamps and some fun techniques. Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca Keppel, and in today's video, I'll be using the new Simon Hurley for Ranger release to create some really fun stamped backgrounds. Plus, I'll be sharing a whole bunch of stamped background techniques. So let's dive right in and start out by making a background with multiple stamps. First technique is to use multiple stamps to create the background. This is the new Simon Hurley cling-mounted rubber stamps called bursts. So I've taken my clear mat out of my stamp wheel because for the cling-mounted stamps, the clear mat is a little too high. But one of the thin mats that I have behind there, they come in black and white, is perfect. So I'm using that. And the first stamp I'm using is this larger burst with piggyback ink. And I will double and sometimes triple stamps. So I just want to let you know, I won't always show that in the video, but if you see somebody with a really clear stamped image, chances are they've at least double stamped it. So don't feel frustrated if you just stamp something once and it looks splashy to you. Now, dye ink will smooth out. It will definitely smooth out, but I really just love the look that a double stamped image looks like. So I'm continuing on with the rainbow of different colors here. I went to the other corner, the diagonal corner, to create the last color, which is going to be blue, which I used Clear Skies for. And then I filled in between the yellow and that blue with Overzealous, which is my green color. So this is just an easy way to create a stamped background, is to, first of all, you can just use one color, but if you're using multiple colors, sometimes it's fun to just stamp a whole rainbow. And each of the images that I stamped is from a different stamp from that set. So I love the way they look together. The next stamp technique is to use two ink colors on one background stamp. This is the cling rubber background stamp called Watercolor from Simon's new release. It is again a cling mounted stamp, so I'm keeping that smaller, thinner mat in my stamp wheel. I have Clear Skies, and you can see I'm doing a mixture of rubbing and tapping the ink onto that background, and then I'll use a pressure tool to just really get even pressure all along the outside of the stamp wheel. I'm adding a little bit of a darker blue in so that it will have a two-tone effect. And I love this. If you are afraid of creating your own watercolor, this background stamp is for you. Next up, we'll create a background using heat embossing. This is the bold wood grain background stamp from this new Simon Hurley release. I add a little anti-static powder tool to some white cardstock and then some Versamark embossing ink to the stamp itself. Again, I use a pressure tool. It's hard to see clear ink on white, so I like to get it done in one pass there so I don't have to do it again. And then I pour gold embossing powder. This is from Altenew, and place that on top, get rid of the excess, and then use a heat tool to melt all that embossing powder. And when it's melted, it goes from a dull look to a shiny gold. For this next technique, let's combine that heat embossing and then color in the images. This is the Rose Borders stamps, and both of these borders can be used either horizontally or vertically on your card. I'm choosing to use a vertical border, and I'm using the larger border. I put anti-static powder on the white cardstock and Versamark ink on the stamp itself. Then I'll take it out of the stamp wheel and pour gold embossing powder on top, shake off the excess. It's a beautiful image. And then I'll heat set that so it is nice and shiny and gold. It doesn't take very long, but with a whole image, you will have to spend a little bit of time heat embossing. I'm using some markers from Ohuhu. I'm trying them out. And so these are not alcohol markers. These are water-based markers, and I'm just having a little fun coloring in one of the roses. I wanted to do kind of like a spotlight coloring effect here. So I am trying to do a little bit of blending, but they're not, like I said, alcohol markers. So it's not the same type of blend that you would get there. but they are really fun to color, and I'm not as concerned about coloring in a heat embossed image as I would be with my Copic markers, which are supposed to last forever, right? Instead of heat embossing, you could do regular stamping and then do the spotlight coloring with your alcohol markers instead. The next effect is to create a tone-on-tone effect with a colored ink and a colored cardstock. I love these whimsical trees. I have one on the left-hand side of a piece of craft cardstock, and I'll use some Weeping Willow ink from Simon Hurley to stamp a brown on the craft. It looks so amazing, and the details of this stamp are absolutely incredible. It looks like an illustrative book. So I just think this is such a gorgeous background, so much fun to create with, and one of the clear stamps and dies in this release goes really, really well with this background. So I stamped the other stamp on the other side of the cardstock. You don't see lots of the trees, but it did give the look of a forest. Next up, we have a peel apart background stamp. I've worked with these before. I absolutely love them. What they are is a 6x6 cling mounted rubber background stamp with parts cut out. So you can see there were a couple of brush strokes that were individually cut out, and then there were 2 rows at the bottom that were also cut out. So I'll place the first stamp down on an A2 piece of white cardstock, and I'll ink that up with Rosy Chinks dye ink from Simon Hurley. Again, I am double stamping, sometimes triple stamping, depending on how I want it to look. Next, I'll place the second line, which I had taken off before, and line it up with the first. I'll also place in the little individual brush strokes, and the reason that I'm doing that is because I want them exactly placed where they're supposed to be placed. So then I'll peel off that first layer and just press down on those individual brush strokes and that line. I'm stamping up the line with some overzealous ink, and I'll stamp that out again using a pressure tool to get great pressure. So you can see there, maybe it looks a little splotchy at first. That's just because of it's a dye ink, but I really want a full opaque look. So I'm double stamping here to get that look. Just wanted to remind you that I do that a lot, but I don't always show it. So here I wanted to show it so that you would know that I do take the time to double and triple stamp a lot of the time. Next, I'll take the next row and line it up where it belongs underneath that last row. And I'm stamping here with Clear Skies ink. You've seen me use Clear Skies a lot. It's because it's my favorite blue. I absolutely love it. I need to grab the refill because I've been using it a lot. For the individual brush strokes, I am inking them up with Versamark ink and then stamping them where they belong. And then I'll place that gold embossing powder on them. So that's the cool thing about the peel apart stamps, is it makes it really easy to do different things like this where there are different colors, maybe some heat embossing, adding different techniques, that kind of thing. So it really makes it easy to create a fun background with multiple colors and multiple techniques all on one piece of cardstock, very simply by removing pieces of the stamp and then placing them back in. So I'll heat set that, and now we have these tiny little gold brush strokes in the middle of these 3 colors. So here are all the backgrounds that I created with all of the new background and cling mounted stamps from the Simon Hurley release. Now let's combine these stamped backgrounds and the rest of the Simon Hurley for Ranger release to create some fun cards. Here are the 3 clear stamp sets and coordinating dies from this release. On the right-hand side is Woodland Wildlife. All of those tiny little images have individual dies to cut them out, so no fussy cutting necessary. In the middle, we have Everyday Wreaths, and then on the left, we have the stamp set Inspired. For this first card, I'll start out with the Everyday Wreaths, and I have stamped a butterfly from the stamp set and a sentiment right on that heat embossed and colored in background, right on the panel. I'll color in the butterfly with the same markers that I used for the one rose, and then I'll grab the coordinating die and cut that out and pop it up right above the sentiment. Super simple, but a great way to include a little bit of coloring and a gorgeous heat embossed floral border, as well as a beautiful butterfly. For this card, I grabbed the bursts background, and I'll use the Spellbinder's corner rounder to round all 4 of the corners. I had accidentally rolled up one of the corners when I was removing it from the stamp wheel, so that's why I decided to round them, but I ended up liking the way that looked. I have 2 of the sentiments from Inspired, and I'm using some VersaFine Black Onyx ink, which is a pigment ink, which will sit on top of the dye ink and the cardstock. And so it'll really show up nicely. It says, follow your dreams and don't let anything stop you. Perfect for that rainbow background. For this next card, I'll stamp one of the images from the Inspired stamp set, as well as one of the brushstrokes. So the image I'm actually stamping in Picket Fence Studios black ink so that I can color it in with some alcohol markers, and the brush stroke I stamped with Shooting Star ink from Simon Hurley. And then I'll put the sentiment right above the brush stroke. The brush stroke actually has a die as well, so I will cut those both out together. The little elephant I colored in with some Ohuhu alcohol markers, and then I used some tape to hold the brushstroke die and the elephant die in place. Then I'll cut down that watercolor background to about 4 by 5 1/4 and layer it on some black cardstock. I used the My Sweet Petunia Precision Glue Press to adhere down the brushstroke, and then some Spellbinders foam squares to pop up the elephant. I love that watercolor background. I'll be using it again and again and again. I can tell you that right now. For this next card, I'm using the brush strokes background. I'll cut that down to 4 by 5 1/4. I have 2 of the sentiments once again from the Inspired stamp set. This one says, "You inspire me, don't stop being you." I'm using 3 pieces of foam tape from Altenew to pop up that panel on an A2 white cardstock background. I really like the way that that looks with some dimension off of that background panel and the stamped sentiment right in the middle of the stamped background. For this card, I'm going back to the Everyday Wreaths, but I'm actually stamping a full wreath this time. I'll stamp it in some Picket Fence Studios black ink. This ink can be used with alcohol ink markers or with watercolor. This time I'll be doing some watercoloring, and I have some watercolor brushes from Altenew. They are very juicy. You don't need a ton, so be very slight with these when you're using them because you can really pull out the tiniest little bit to create with water to create the rest of the coloring. So you can absolutely use the whole marker just to color in these leaves, but you really don't need a whole ton. They are very pigmented. Then I'll use the die to cut them out, and I'll take the center that the die cut out and place it back in the wreath so that I can stamp my sentiment right in the center there. It says, "Thanks for everything you do," and of course I will stamp that twice so it really shines and looks black on the center of that area. So I'll place that down with some liquid adhesive on that bold wood grain embossed background, and then I'll pop up the wreath right around it. Again, love that little hint of dimension and then the sentiment flat to the card. For this card, I'll use the Woodland Wildlife, and I have the bear here. I'm using the same ink that I used for that tree background that we created, the Weeping Willow ink. And so I'll stamp the bear in Weeping Willow. I'll double stamp him so he's really crisp, and then I'll stamp the sentiment with VersaFine Black Onyx ink, and it says "Sending Bear Hugs." I think that's so cute and such a nice little cute sentiment. I have some Prismacolor pencils and I'll color in the bear. I cut down the sentiment to a sentiment strip and I'll pop that up in the center of the tree background and then just place the bear at the bottom. Simple and cute. The trees are really the amazing part of that background there, so I just love letting them be the focus of the card. I love stamping techniques and I love creating my own backgrounds. So this release from Simon Hurley was an absolute blast to create with, but I'd love to hear if something caught your eye today. Let me know in the comments below. As always, I want to thank you so much for stopping by and spending time with me. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you again soon. Oh, that really hurt. Okay, it's time to clean up the floor, honestly. Really time to clean up the floor. Should I show you the floor? No, I'm not going to show you the floor. I'm sorry. I'm not there yet.